Welcome to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking about corporations as part of our Listen and Learn series. Your Bar Exam Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the bar exam experience so you can study effectively, stay sane, and hopefully pass and move on with your life. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app and check out our sister podcast, the Law School Toolbox Podcast. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on barexamtoolbox.com, and we love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started. Welcome back. In this podcast, we're going to discuss corporations. More specifically, we are going to discuss a particularly troublesome concept for many exam takers: direct versus derivative actions. Although some of these concepts might be unfamiliar, we'll explain all of the terminology and rules that you need to know. To review these rules and illustrate these concepts, we'll also go over two hypotheticals adopted from the California Bar Exam. So let's dive into our first hypothetical adopted from the February 2017 California Bar Exam. To view the full hypothetical in question, please refer to the show notes. Okay, on to the question. Years ago, Art incorporated Retail Inc. He paid $100 for its stock and lent it $50,000. He elected himself and two family members to the board of directors, which in turn elected him as president and approved a 10-year lease for a store. He managed the store and was paid 10% of Retail's gross revenues as compensation. Subsequently, Barbara bought 20% of Retail's stock from Art. Retail's board approved a contract to buy 30% of the inventory of XYZ Co., a company owned by Art. Subsequently, Art began taking home some of Retail's inventory without paying for it. Retail had net profits in some years and net losses in others. It paid dividends in some years, but not in others. In some years, Retail's board met 3 times a year. In others, it never met. Recently, Retail ceased business. Its assets were limited to $5,000 in cash. Another claim was Art's for the $50,000 that he had lent and had just become due. Barbara filed a lawsuit against Retail and Art. Can Barbara bring a direct or derivative claim against Art? Discuss. To answer this question, let's dive into the nuances between direct and derivative causes of action. A direct action involves an injury or breach of a duty owed to a shareholder of a corporation. A shareholder may bring a direct action against a director or officer, but the focus is on the injury to shareholder. The shareholder must prove an actual injury that is not solely the result of an injury suffered by the corporation. In other words, think about what duty was breached or who suffered damages. The duty that was breached must have been a duty owed directly to the shareholder. Similarly, the injury must be one suffered directly by the shareholder. The damages awarded in a direct action will be paid directly to the shareholder or member. Now, let's distinguish our direct action with a derivative action. In a derivative action, a shareholder is suing to enforce the corporation's claim, not his own personal claim. The suit must be one in which the corporation could have brought itself, but what happened has harmed the corporation in some way. For example, fraudulent or misleading statements by the board resulting in a drop in share value is the type of harm suffered by the corporation, warranting a derivative suit. Again, just like you would to determine if you have a direct action, ask yourself who the duty was owed to and who or what suffered the injury. To commence or maintain a derivative suit under the Revised Model Business Corporation Act, RMBCA for short, the plaintiff shareholder must meet the following requirements. First, the shareholder must have standing. So the shareholder must be a shareholder at the time of the action or omission or become a shareholder by operation of law from such a shareholder. Second, the shareholder must continue to be a shareholder through entry of judgment. Third, the shareholder must fairly and adequately represent the interests of the corporation. Fourth, and finally, the shareholder must make a written demand upon the corporation to take suitable action. In terms of timing, a derivative suit cannot be commenced until 90 days after a written demand, unless one of two things happens. The corporation rejects the demand, or the corporation will suffer irreparable harm if forced to wait. The demand requirement is critical and forces the shareholder to demand that the corporation bring legal action against those who caused the harm. So let's talk about a particular aspect of the demand requirement, when making the demand would be futile. Under the RMBCA, there is no exception to the demand requirement for futility. However, under the Delaware General Corporation Law, DGCL for short, there is an exception to the demand requirement when asking the board to bring suit would be futile. Now let's talk damages. Unlike in a direct action, the damages awarded in a derivative action will be paid to the corporation, not the shareholder, but the shareholder may recover the reasonable cost of the litigation. Okay, with those rules behind us, let's dive into our question. So how can our shareholder Barbara pursue an action against retail or its officers and directors? In other words, can she bring a direct action or is a derivative action what's called for? Well, here, Art, our not-so-trusty president of retail, breached a duty of care owed to the corporation by taking home Art without paying for it. Because he breached a duty to the corporation and injured the corporation, a derivative suit is appropriate here. Now that we know we want to bring a derivative suit, let's see if we meet the requirements. Barbara is a shareholder, and it appears that she'd be a shareholder through the entry of judgment. Next, as a 20% shareholder in the corporation, and with the only other shareholder being Art, Barbara can adequately and fairly represent the interests of the corporation in the lawsuit. Now finally, let's take a look at the demand requirement. In our fact pattern, we don't have any facts that suggest that Barbara made a demand on the board. But because the board consists of Art, our little thief, and his two family members, Barbara can argue that demand will be futile. The board would clearly already be in favor of Art. Here, there are no facts to suggest that Barbara made any demand on the board. However, because Retail's board consists of Art and his two family members, Barbara will argue that demand would be futile because his family members would be biased in favor of Art. Art will argue that had she made a demand, it would have been answered, and the derivative suit would be improper. Nonetheless, the fact that only 3 members are on the board and all 3 are related would likely render the demand futile. So in sum, a derivative suit is appropriate here, and Barbara meets our requirements to bring a derivative action. And with that, we have our answer. So let's go on to another hypothetical adopted from the July 2015 California Bar Exam. Online Inc. was duly incorporated as an internet service provider. Its articles of incorporation authorized issuance of 1,000 shares of stock at $1,000 par value. Online initially issued only 550 shares to its shareholders as follows. Dick and Sam each received 200 shares, and Jane received 150 shares. Online's board of directors, composed of Jane, Sam, and Harry, named Jane as Chief Executive Officer and named Harry as General Counsel. Online's business grew substantially in the following months. Still, Online was short on cash. As a result, instead of paying Jane $10,000 of her salary in cash, it issued her 50 additional shares with the approval of its board of directors. Looking to expand its operations, Online sought to enter a strategic partnership with LargeCo, Inc. Jane had learned about LargeCo through Harry's wife, who she knew was the majority shareholder of LargeCo. Jane directed Harry to negotiate the terms of the transaction with LargeCo. In the course of Harry's negotiations with LargeCo, LargeCo offered to acquire the assets of Online in exchange for a cash buyout of $1 million. Harry telephoned Jane and Sam. Jane and Sam agreed with Harry that the offer was a good idea, and Harry accepted LargeCo's offer. 2 days after the completion of the transaction, LargeCo announced a joint venture with TechCo, which was solely owned by Harry. The joint venture was valued at $10 million. In its press release, TechCo described the joint venture as a remarkable synergy of LargeCo's new technology with Techno's large consumer base. The following week, Dick learned of LargeCo's acquisition of Online's assets. An expert in technology matters, he was furious about the price and terms of the acquisition, believing that the value of Online had been seriously underestimated. Can Dick bring a direct or derivative action? In assessing whether he can bring a direct action, we have to again ask ourselves, who was a duty owed to and who suffered an injury? Was there a duty owed directly to Dick, an injury suffered unique to him that would allow him to bring a direct action? Well, here the closest Dick might be able to get to a direct action is to sue on the basis of oppression in a closely held corporation. In a closely held company, a company with a small number of shareholders, the majority shareholder cannot take actions to oppress the minority shareholders. Oppression would include taking actions to deprive the minority shareholders of their ability to exercise certain rights, such as voting or financial rights like dividends. Here, however, Sam and Jane's holdings of 200 shares equal Dick's shares, so we don't have a case of majority shareholder oppression here. Okay, now let's take a look at the option to bring a derivative action. Is there a harm to the corporation that would allow for a derivative action? Here in particular, we had a huge company sale that looked to be an insider transaction between friends and family at a seriously low valuation. That suggests that our board may have breached their duty of loyalty and perhaps their duty of care to the corporation. The result was a huge financial loss to the corporation and, as a result, to our shareholders. Because of that, a derivative action over a direct action would be appropriate to challenge this conduct. Now, let's take a look to see if we meet all of our requirements. First, Dick meets our standing requirement that he is a shareholder because he has 200 shares. Second, Dick would fairly represent the interests of the corporation. He owns a substantial amount of shares in comparison with the other shareholders, and he was not involved in any of our suspect dealings. Next, let's take a look at our demand requirement. As you remember, a shareholder must normally make a demand on the board before bringing a derivative action. Here, however, demands would likely be excused as futile because the action is against all the members of the board, our defendants in the action. Dick can likely recover damages for the breaches of the duties of loyalty mentioned above by Harry, Jane, and Sam, and may even be able to recover for the water stock issue to Jane. Now, while Dick doesn't recover the money directly, he could receive attorney's fees and costs of suit if he is successful. And as a shareholder, he benefits by the corporation being made whole. And with that, we are out of time. Hopefully you found these examples to be helpful reminders of how to tackle corporations' questions. If you're studying for the bar right now, I would definitely encourage you to practice these questions on your own. Or you can use tools like our Brainy Bar Bank tool to look up California Bar or UBE questions that also focus on corporations or business associations. I also want to take a second to remind you to check out our blog at barexamtoolbox.com, which is full of useful tips to help you prepare and stay sane as you study for the bar exam. You can find information on our website about our courses, tools, and one-on-one tutoring programs to support you as you study for the UBE or California Bar Exam. If you enjoyed this episode of the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast, please take a moment to leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you are in law school, you might also like to check out our popular Law School Toolbox podcast as well. If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@barexamtoolbox.com or allison@barexamtoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at barexamtoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.